I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. That phrase from Rene Descartes' Meditations is one of the most famous phrases throughout all of Western philosophy. But what does it mean? What does it tell us about me and my existence? What does it tell us about the nature of thought, of thinking itself? What does it tell us about the mind? In this video, we're going to look at Descartes' answers to those questions. We're going to look at the theory he comes up with of substance dualism. Okay, and we're going to dive into that right now. Descartes says, I knew I was a substance whose whole essence or nature is simply to think, and which does not require any place or depend upon any material thing in order to exist. Accordingly, this I, that is the soul by which I am what I am, is entirely distinct from the body, and indeed is easier to know than the body, or would not fail to be whatever it is, even if the body did not exist. So what does Descartes mean here? What kind of picture of the mind is he giving us? And how does he claim to know this? So let's take a look at each of those in turn. This is Descartes' description of his theory of substance dualism, or sometimes called Cartesian dualism. Cartesian meaning it's the theory that comes from Descartes. So to understand substance dualism, we basically need to understand two terms, substance and dualism. Well, dualism is straightforward. It basically means two, or it means that there's fundamentally two of something, two completely different somethings that don't reduce one to the other. And those somethings, in the case of substance dualism, are meant to be substances. So what's a substance? What does Descartes mean by a substance? Well, this is kind of a philosophical term of art. It's something that goes back to Aristotle, and it's a term that was used heavily by the scholastic philosophers. So those philosophers throughout the late Middle Ages who were developing Catholic philosophy. We don't really need to know too much about what they meant by a substance, but basically it means a fundamental kind of thing whereby if you had two substances, one could exist without the other. So you might think that, a glass of water and the atoms that make it up are two completely different things, and sure they are, but there's a relationship. The glass of water couldn't exist unless there were some atoms there doing their thing, right? So there's a relationship between the atoms doing their thing and a glass of water existing. So we won't want to count those as two different substances. Rather, we would say they were all part of one substance, the physical world as it's investigated by the sciences. But for Descartes, there's another substance, the mind, the thinking substance, that is wholly different, that is distinct and can't in any way be reduced to the physical world. So we can sum up substance dualism as the theory that there are two fundamentally different categories of being, the mind on the one hand and the physical world, which Descartes calls body, on the other. So this is both a theory of the mind. It's saying that the mind is this non-physical substance, but it's also a metaphysics. It's saying that the universe ultimately comprises two, or at least two, fundamental substances, the mind and the body. Okay, by body here, Descartes doesn't just mean, physical human bodies. He's talking about every physical object, every bit of physical reality, but not the mind. So when we think about ourselves, when Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, I exist, what does he mean by I? Well, he means this non-physical mental substance, the mind. I am a mind, not a physical body. That the mind and the physical body are completely separate, and I'm identified only with my mind. And Descartes says it's not merely that the mind and the body are distinct, but the mind could exist without any physical stuff existing, in which case I would still be me, I would still be my mind, and my physical body, that's really nothing to do with it. Now, in some ways, that's a pretty extreme view of what it is to be a person, because to me, my physical body doesn't feel just like this vehicle that carries me around. It's not like, a car or a train carriage that I can get into and it takes me from A to B, then I get out and, I haven't changed. I can change my car or get on a different train and I'm still me, right? But with my body, it feels very much more part of me. The way I think about myself in the world has quite a lot to do with my body, the way it interacts with the world, and the kind of body it is. I feel pretty confident that if I had the body of, say, a sheep or a tiger or a camel or whatever, but still my human mind, I would be a different person. I would be a thoroughly different kind of being. So it's not just my mind that makes me, it's the body as well. And, Descartes sometimes acknowledges this. He says that my mind is not merely residing in the body like the captain of a ship, piloting it around. But he says that. It's hard to know how he makes good on that, given that he says that what I really am is just my mind, and I could exist perfectly well without my body existing. It's kind of hard to square those things. Before we go any further, I'd just like to jump in here and say, I hope you're enjoying this content. If you'd like to help me out to make more educational academic content like this, go and take a look at my Ko-Fi page and see how you can help me out. Okay, but let's just set that worry to one side and let's just look at the arguments that Descartes gives for his dualism. First argument, the argument from doubt. We've kind of met this already. So when Descartes says this I is entirely distinct from the body and indeed is easier to know than the body, well, there we've got a kind of proto-argument for dualism. I can know something about my mind much more clearly and directly than I know about the body. So here we've got the idea that because of this, they're going to be distinct. So let's see if we can set that out as a clear argument. So it might go like this. Premise 1, I'm certain that I'm a thinking thing. Premise 2, I'm not certain that I'm a physical thing. Conclusion, therefore, there's a difference between those two things. I'm not a physical thing. Why are those premises meant to be true? Well, premise 1, I'm certain that I'm a thinking thing. That's meant to be the content of the cogito. I think, therefore I am. Certainty that I am a thinking thing. Premise 2, why am I not certain that I'm a physical thing? Well, maybe I'm certain that right now I have a physical body, but am I certain that that's me? Descartes is asking us to imagine what would happen if the physical body changed or vanished entirely. Wouldn't you still be you if you were thinking those thoughts? If your mind persisted but your body didn't, wouldn't you still be you? Yeah, it seems like that's got a good shout. So there's at least doubt there. So I'm not certain that I'm a physical thing in the way that I am certain that I'm a thinking thing. That's what Descartes wants us to imagine. But whatever you think about the truth of those premises, the main problem here is that this isn't a good argument because it's not a valid argument. We can give similar arguments that have the same logical form that are clearly invalid. That is, they have true premises but a false conclusion. So here's one argument, here's one analogy, right? Suppose we all go to a fancy dress party and there's someone there dressed up as a unicorn. It's a really good unicorn costume, so I can't see who they are. And I'm wondering, who's that person in the unicorn costume? Is it you? And then I reason, just like Descartes did, well, I'm certain that you are you, because logic. I'm not certain that you are the person in the unicorn costume, because I can't tell who they are. And I infer, therefore, you are not identical to the person in the unicorn costume. Right? Because certain of you being you, not certain of you being the unicorn guy, so you're not the unicorn guy. Obviously, that isn't a valid argument, because you might be, right? It might be you dressed up in the unicorn costume. And in fact, we're sure that it's somebody in there, but whoever it is, I could run this argument and supposedly conclude that it's not them. So it's got to be somebody in the unicorn costume, so this argument is guaranteed to take me from true premises to at least some false conclusion. So it can't be a valid argument. And because this argument's not valid, and it has the same form, the same structure as Descartes' argument about the mind and the body, Descartes' argument can't be a valid one. I can't go from certainty or uncertainty whether this is the same as this to, therefore, this isn't the same as this. But luckily for him, Descartes gives us some other arguments. He also gives us the argument from simplicity. It goes like this. Whatever is extended is divisible into parts. Not in reality, then in understanding, and vice versa. Second premise, the mind is not divisible. Conclusion, therefore, the mind is not extended. Okay, so we need to break this down a little bit. What's this notion of extension? So Descartes thought just like the scholastics before him, that for each substance, there is an essential property that characterizes what that substance is. For the mind, the essential property is thought, right? If it's thinking, it's a mind, and if it can't think, it's not a mind at all. And for body, or the physical world, the essential characteristic is extension, that is taking up space. Anything that exists in a physical sense has to take up some physical reality. And Descartes' argument goes like this. Well, if something is extended in space, then it can be divided. It can be chopped up. Maybe not in practice, but at least in principle, right? If I've got this thing that takes up a certain amount of space, then I can imagine the left half and the right half, okay? So even in principle, it's going to be divisible. And anything that's divisible in this way counts as an extended thing. But the mind, Descartes says, isn't divisible in this way. The mind is a kind of a coherent whole. We can't divide it up. So it's not an extended thing. Now that is a valid argument. If the mind lacks some property that you need to have to be an extended thing, it follows that the mind isn't an extended thing. It's not a physical thing, it's a non-physical thing. So it's a valid argument, but the question is whether the premises are true. Now there might be some contemporary physical reasons for rejecting the first premise, right? So Descartes thinks that to be a physical thing you have to take up some space, but we have this notion from contemporary particle physics of point particles, physical particles that have no dimensions at all, so they wouldn't be divisible into anything physically smaller. Okay, so that's kind of a problem for the first premise. The second premise, Descartes was a bit more worried about, the idea that the mind is not divisible. People pointed out to him things like, isn't the mind divisible into faculties, like the faculty of perception, the faculty of thinking, and so on? And Descartes sort of said, well, that's a kind of way of dividing up the mind, but it's not the relevant one. What I'm talking about here is spatial division, right? Dividing up a thing into, let's say, its left half and its right half. Okay, if I've got a physical thing like the desk in front of me, I could chop it up, or I could imagine a line down the middle and say, there's one half, there's the other. So I'm spatially dividing it, so Descartes concludes the mind isn't the same as any physical thing. Well, this is a pretty good argument, but the trouble here is we've got this notion of something being spatial. So we have to say for premise 2, the mind isn't spatially divisible, basically it's not spatial. And that really seems to beg the question against physicalists, right? Physicalists are people who think that the mind is in some way related to the human brain or the human body or whatever. It's in some way part of the physical universe. Suppose, for example, you're an identity theorist thinking that the mind or mental events or mental processes are ultimately identical to processes in the brain. Clearly, processes in the brain are spatially extended. They take up space. So mental events, mental processes, according to the identity theorist, would also take up space, okay? So in that case, the second premise wouldn't be true. Now, we're not saying that Descartes would have to accept identity theory. Of course he wouldn't. And we're not saying identity theory is true. We just don't know. The point is we can't assume that it's not true as a premise in an argument for dualism. Dualism is meant to conclude that the mind is not identical to the brain. So we can't assume as a premise that the mind isn't identical to the brain. That would be begging the question. Descartes gives us a third argument for the distinctness of the mind and the body, the physical world. And this one, it's a bit more complicated, but it's got an awful lot of power to it, so it's worth going through it carefully. It's the argument from clear and distinct understanding. Goes like this. First premise, if A can exist apart from B, and vice versa, then A and B are in fact distinct. Second premise, if I clearly and distinctly understand the possibility that A exists apart from B and B apart from A, then God can bring it about that A and B exist apart. From those premises, we get a first conclusion. Therefore, if I clearly and distinctly understand the possibility that A exists apart from B and B apart from A, then A and B are in fact distinct. Third premise, I do clearly and distinctly understand the possibility of the mind, that is myself, and the body existing apart from one another. Main conclusion, therefore, mind and body are in fact distinct. This at first sight is a pretty confusing argument. I mean, it's got this idea of God can bring certain things about, and you might think, well, you know, that's making me question premise 2. But really, I don't think we need to bring God into it or anything like that. The idea might be put a bit more simply like this. If I can genuinely understand A and B and A as existing without B, then it really is possible for A to exist without B. And if A could exist without B, then they can't be the same thing. So this is what's called a conceivability argument. I can thoroughly understand A and B and understand, or I can imagine, or I can conceive of A and B as being separate, as existing one apart from the other. Maybe I can conceive of A existing without B existing at all. So they can't be the same thing. In particular, in the case of the mind and the body, I can conceive of my mind existing without a physical body existing. You know, maybe I'm just kind of floating around in some kind of non-physical existence. On the other hand, maybe I can imagine a body just like mine not having any mind at all. So this kind of argument has been very powerful in contemporary philosophy of mind. The famous zombie argument that's been run by people like David Chalmers is basically the idea that I could imagine this philosophical zombie, somebody with a body just like mine but with no mental states at all. They are dark on the inside. And the argument structure is basically because I can imagine that, because I can conceive of that with no contradiction, it is in some sense possible. And that just shows that the mind can't be in any way dependent on the physical world. So the step we make in that argument from it being genuinely conceivable without contradiction to the things being genuinely possible is a really, really big argumentative step. And it's very questionable whether just because something is conceivable, that makes it genuinely possible. Some philosophers think that's a good step, but an awful lot of philosophers think there's a problem there. So there we have Descartes' arguments for his substance dualism. There are also more modern arguments for substance dualism that are kind of inspired by Descartes. So here's one. Premise 1. Physical things are necessarily physical. But on the other hand, premise 2, thinkers aren't necessarily physical. Therefore, conclusion, thinkers aren't physical things. So this argument is clearly influenced by Descartes, right? In the idea that the mind is essentially a thinking thing, thought being the essential characteristic of the mind, but not for the body. The fact that the body is associated with the mind is kind of accidental. It's completely contingent to it. So the real question here is this a valid argument? And it's difficult to say because it involves these concepts of necessity and possibility. So we'd have to go into contemporary modal logic, first order modal logic, to work out whether this is a valid argument or not. And I think the short version is, well, you can make this into a valid argument, a logically valid argument, by tightening up the meaning of the premises. We would have to tighten up that second premise basically to mean that for anything that is in fact a thinker, that thing isn't necessarily a physical thing. And when you put it like that, who's to say whether that's true or not? Maybe, for all we know, that in order for that thing to be a thinker in the first place, it relies on some physical activity going on to generate that thought. Who knows? So we can make the argument valid, but at the cost of giving us a kind of a clear sense that the premises are true. So it's a good argument, but it's not a completely solid argument in favour of substance dualism. Now, as a matter of fact, hardly any contemporary philosophers are substance dualists. Some are dualists in some sense, but not really substance dualists. And that's because substance dualism brings with it a whole host of problems. And the main problems are centred around this central issue. How could there ever be causal interaction between two completely different substances? We're all pretty sure that there is causal interaction, right? You tread on my foot, I feel pain, I say, ow, don't do that again. So that's a physical action, you treading on my foot, causing a mental event, my pain, causing my physical behaviour, me saying, ow, don't do that again. How could there be this causal interaction between completely different substances? And moreover, isn't causal interaction just something that happens between physical things? I mean, after all, causation is part of the world of science. If the mind, being a completely different substance, isn't part of that world of science, if it's not subject to that world of science, how could we talk about causation information there at all. So this problem of interaction is a really, really deep problem for dualists, and in particular for substance dualists. We could go into that in more detail, but we're going to leave that for another day. There is so much more to say about Rene Descartes, about his thought, and about why he is one of the greatest philosophers in the Western canon. If you want to see a bit more of that, check out this video over here. If you've got any questions, leave me a comment down below. I'm going to try to answer all of them. Thank you to all my Ko-Fi supporters for making this content possible, and thank you to you for watching this far. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back here soon.